a veteran of amateur broadcasting. I've been railing against Trump authoritarianism for 3 years. So I'm still doing it because even though he's out of office, his pernicious, invidious influence is still causing death and disability and economic dysfunction wherever his influence is still felt, because Trump is merely the apex of a authoritarian thrust from a loose coalition of religious white Christian extremists and powerful corporate capitalists who don't want to pay tax and feel that they should not in any way, shape or form be regulated or taxed, and that they should not have to contribute to the social framework and social infrastructure of the society that helped scaffold their wealth. So in a way, it's a function of a failure to admit good fortune, that good fortune has played a role in the success of American billionaires and other billionaires, that they have been lucky, that it's not all personal merit, that they've existed in a time and a space in which good infrastructure, roads and schools and public health systems and publicly funded things have given rise to a society that then has enough currency to spend on their products, on their, what is it that Coke make again? They make all manner of things, toilet paper and other consumer products. What is it that Peter Thiel makes? Peter Thiel, the corporate billionaire who helps drive Facebook's secret authoritarian pandering, that dude just makes billions out of tech. Oh yeah, he helped found PayPal and he's on the board of Facebook, and Facebook secretly gives Ben Shapiro a free pass from their terms and conditions, so that even though you're not supposed to repost your own posts and game the algorithm, they let Ben Shapiro do that because he's got $11 million that he's already spent this year so far of dark money. Presumably some corporate billionaires are funding Ben Shapiro to spew Islamophobia and right-wing bullshit on the internet. Bob's here, and Bob says hello from Bernards. Hello, Bob. Lovely to see you. So, yes, if we're going to call out a con artist today, let's call out the Texas Education Authority. What did they say? That they're not going to, you don't have to inform anybody if your child has a COVID diagnosis. Hang on, I've got the new guidance right up here. Schools don't have to inform parents of a positive case. Schools don't have to conduct contact tracing. If a school does contact trace, parents can still choose to send a child to school if they are a close contact of an infected student. So the Texas Education Authority has been prepared to step boldly out there in favor of endangering your child's life. So Texas parents who have the capacity to engage with facts will know. Look, I've been on Twitter a lot for the last few days, even though I didn't broadcast. I was on Twitter and I argued with one individual anti-vaxxer, a coach who's in charge of motivating and organizing and supporting children, and he's adamantly anti-vaccine because he says he doesn't trust the CDC. He thinks they're too on the Dem side, which is a continuation of Trump's insistence that, or Trump's weaponization of contrarian politics, the type of identity politics that says, stand with me against the world. You'll enjoy it and you'll achieve an addictive little high every time we disappoint someone, every time we own the libs, every time you just get to believe something that is the opposite of what experts are saying. And you'll feel like you're appointing yourself as an unofficial expert around the clock. Oh, look, I'm criticizing the experts for evolving advice or changing policy. Experts, can't you even be consistent in response to an evolving virus and an evolving level of scientific understanding? And consensus is not typically uniform. Scientific consensus does evolve and has people making different arguments or prioritizing different elements of science. It doesn't have to be 100% consistent to be effective. It's all the more respectable if it shows intellectual parry and thrust of different people making different points and listening and engaging and respecting that, and not just dismissing science out of hand for a failure to be 100% consistent and stagnant over time. Stagnant's the word. Oh, groovy. I've got the anti-vax beach back on. Get lost. Oh no, she's making a nice point. Okay, I unmuted her comment and it says, Dav, there are plenty peeps against this vaccine who aren't Trump supporters. True, absolutely holistic, Deb, I believe you. You've just unfortunately thrown your intellectual lot in with someone who weaponized contrarianism. So you don't have to be a racist Trump supporter, but you are still passively succumbing to racism if you deprioritize public health in the way that anti-vaxxers do. Because anti-vaxxers prioritize liberty and individual choice and their own research skills and deprioritize expert advice, deprioritize public health in relation to a pandemic that has disproportionately harmed Black people, Hispanic, Latino people, and other people of color in the United States who are overrepresented in public-facing essential worker roles. So their communities also have a reduced amount of access to quality healthcare due to the effects of systematic racism and systematic economic harm. So it's racist of you to be an anti-vaxxer, even if you're not a Trump supporter, a racist Trump supporter. So yes, I totally accept that you're a victim of Russian anti-vax propaganda that predates Trump and is a function of Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin's desire to weaken Western democracies in order for Russian citizens to get less discontent when they see the gap. Just to give Russian media something to cling to report on dysfunction and unsatisfactory outcomes in the West. So Russians want you to have measles outbreaks. They want you to have conflict and fault lines and weakness in your society. They want that division and antagonism. So they cultivate hapless goons like Holistic Deb to repeat and recycle and dig themselves into a little identity hole whereby they believe that not only is vaccination bad, but that the key to health is giving your kids the gift of forever being free of all vaccines. And if any of your children do happen to get sick and you're in the anti-vax community, there's shame heaped upon you for sort of betraying the narrative of anti-vaccination is the guarantee for good health and success in children. So that kind of really selfish addiction to the pursuit of wellness in contrariness to public health advice, that you know best, you're the real expert, mom, go with your gut, listen to inflated stories of harm from or side effects from vaccines. And side effects do happen sometimes, and there are people who sustain vaccine injuries, and it's undesirable, but more undesirable is mass death. And what tends to be persuasive with anti-vax parents who are at least not 100% indoctrinated is seeing pictures of children who actually have those diseases that the anti-vax community has assured everybody are a nothing. Oh, measles is nothing. Nurse your own child through measles and hooray, you've made them stronger and wiser and better. And they'll be so much better than the vaccinated, weak, sickly children. All of this ego-driven bullshit is a lie and values anecdote over the generation of masses of data that can say, look at these better outcomes associated with modern science, that polio, that smallpox, that measles, that rubella, that all of these diseases have been smallpox largely eliminated, but measles mostly eliminated, except for outbreaks amongst groups of people who think they're too cool for school. Thank you, Perry Pilot. She is spreading disinformation about vaxxers. She should be banned from HAPS. These are the people who are refusing the vaccine, though, so how can you blame white people? Oh, wow, super duper racist, Deb. Black people are completely not the only people refusing the vaccine. There's a relatively high proportion of Black people who refuse the vaccine or who don't have access to the vaccine, who can't afford to take a day off work, or who have substantiated reasons to distrust the medical establishment as a result of mistreatment of Black people by white medical authorities, thinking specifically of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, where the cure for syphilis was withheld from a significant population of Black men who were being studied in a not just a callous but actively malevolent way, even after penicillin was invented, and they were lied to. They were dissuaded from joining the army because the army would have diagnosed their syphilis and cured them, or given them the penicillin treatment that would have cured their syphilis, instead leading their family members to become infected and have shortened lifespans and to incur immeasurable suffering, pain, and death. And that was just the callousness of white people who don't care, who might not even think they're racist, but they don't care about the lives and happiness and rights of people of color. So I put Deb in that category. Look at her here saying that Black people are the people who are refusing the vaccine and ignoring the fact that the strong correlation between Trump votes and under-vaccination rates or poor vaccination rates. It's predominantly Trump supporters, and you might not know this yet, even though there are exceptions. There are non-Trump supporters. There's just some pure extreme left hippies who also don't get vaccinated against COVID because they are entrenched in an ideological pathway of oppositional defiance disorder. That's how I'm going to describe it. It's oppositional defiance disorder because they define themselves as being contrary to the mainstream, and that fuels their egotistical devotion or just their brainwashed devotion to pursuit of health at the expense of community health. And I'll say misguided pursuit of health, because it's not really true that the key to having healthy children is to have unvaccinated children. Vaccines are not poisons that make your children sickly and weak. They are opportunities for your children to avoid disease. And anti-hippie, extreme left anti-vaxxers are coasting on high levels of vaccination in the general community until they manage to get a critical mass of anti-vaxxers who then open the door to disabling levels of disease and death. Paul stopped following Holistic Deb the first moment she said the virus was a hoax. Unfortunately, she still has a presence on HAPS and other platforms. Yeah, why can't we get her off this platform? She's probably useful to the people at HAPS, and maybe they're saying it's a free speech thing. But look, after January the 6th, I think that was a galvanizing moment for the conscience of some people who run media platforms, social media platforms, to say, look, we really shouldn't be facilitating people or giving a platform to people who bring death along with them. And the death was very in your face evident on January the 6th. There was smoke. There was a man who accidentally tased himself to death. There was Ashley Babbitt, who got shot in the neck as she tried to crawl through a window she broke to be able to murder legislators who were being evacuated in front of her. So the death and the bad intentions were so condensed into visibility on that day that some social media platform CEOs drew the line. They kicked Trump off Twitter. They've put some other people off platforms, but Holistic Deb still manages to squeeze through their terms and conditions. And it is unacceptable. It's unacceptable to distribute death in that way. People will, like Holistic Deb, will chase clout and chase acceptance, and it's probably reasonably lucrative for them. I don't know on an individual basis how much Holistic Deb rakes it in out of spreading disinformation and death, but it's not cool. It's not cool, and I condemn anybody who allows people like her to be on the platform. Holistic Deb says, I'm not anti-vaccine, you label everyone. You're not anti-vaccine, Holistic Deb? Oh, I'm sorry for just overgeneralizing about someone who said that COVID was a hoax. If you're pro-vaccine, feel free to make some pro-vaccine statements, pro-science statements, just generally pro-social, non-ridiculous statements, and I will put it up on my screen for you. Perry Pilot says, lots of stories coming out now about anti-vaxxers paying the ultimate price now that they have caught COVID. On the plus side, it's starting to make some think twice about their choices. Yes, it is good that media is platforming the deathbed confessions and regrets of the better people, because it still takes conscience to publicly admit that you were tricked, to publicly admit that you were bamboozled into dismissing the vaccine. And they don't always put it like that. They just might say, I made that decision, it was bad. Just that admission is so powerful, because a lot of people won't make it. A lot of people will die cursing doctors and nurses for even telling them they have COVID. A lot of people will die without ever recanting their own foolish buy-in to a con artist's push to gain electoral advantage for himself, to gain an improved chance of holding on to power by positioning himself as the alternate reality of safety, of selling to people a world in which COVID wasn't a big deal. COVID was a hoax, and you never would have to lock down, and you wouldn't ever have to wear a mask, and you could feel proud and powerful about defending freedom and liberty against the bad people who want you to mask up and get vaccinated and consider the community as well as considering yourself and your family. And setting up those two concerns as if they're in opposition. So Trump made it in opposition, that you should just get to think about your personal liberty, and that's in contrast to other people asking you to care about other people. So Trump tells you, no, prioritize yourself and what you want to do. And people go, yeah, whatever it is, it's a cause to get behind. People will get invigorated if they find someone who gives them something to rally around. Which is why fascism is so dangerous, because fascism is just an unprincipled person willing to capitalize on people's emotional hunger, willing to capitalize on emotional appetite. So it was never the economic anxiety that drew people to Trump. It was always racism. It was always Trump recognizing the emotional appetite amplified and increased by Fox News and their anti-migrant propaganda, their subtle or overt propaganda against people with different skin colors and how they could be categorized as not real Americans. Fox can do that subtly by showing lots of pictures of white people and saying, here are your true blue real Americans in diners, and subtly position Black Americans and migrants as not real Americans and say, oh, Tucker Carlson says immigrants bringing filth to this country. Laura Ingraham just making migrants and migrant allies and Black people allies into the other, people who challenge the true legacy and inheritance of white people and their freedom from any kind of compulsion to learn history, American history, and a freedom from any need to ever consider the big picture and the injustices that have been perpetrated against different people, the freedom to never consider if reparations might be necessary, to never consider the necessity of affirmative action to redress some of the ongoing systematic discrimination tendencies in fields of employment, in fields of health, in fields of infrastructure, in all of those. Perry Pilot says, one confession he's heard was, I was wrong about the vaccine. Can you give me the jab now? And the medical response was, sorry, it's too late. True, if you've been severely infected with COVID, you can't get a vaccine to train your immune system to prevent a serious case of COVID. Vaccine has helped reduce the virus from being spread. The increase in cases are from non-vaccinated. Absolutely, Brian. Thank you for stating it so simply and cleanly. I notice Holistic Deb, having been offered the opportunity to say something positive about vaccines, has not done so. Yeah. Bob says, see my good news above. Good news, Texas Oil and Gas, 450,000 union members support green energy transition at last week's convention, which will definitely aggravate Texas politicians. Yes, that is awesome, Bob. Hooray that 450,000 union members support green energy transition. Perhaps that shows a deeper penetration at a community level of the understanding that climate overheating harms everybody. People understand that overheating is bad. Heating maybe sounds pleasantly warm. It's what we do to our homes. Climate overheating at least draws attention to the idea that there are negative consequences. It's undesirable to have an overheated planet. It's undesirable to have more frequent and more severe unnatural disasters. And they're unnatural disasters because natural disasters occur at a certain level, but if you add a human-induced temperature increase to that, creating more evaporation of moisture into the air, and so more rainfall and more powerful winds and stronger hurricanes and tornadoes and more dry tinder in forested areas, so more intense and larger and more devastating bushfires. Those things are bad, and we're hearing about them so much in the news that perhaps the balance of power is shifting, or the balance of information is shifting to bring more people on board, even people whom the right has tried to indoctrinate, that the lefties are coming for your jobs. Even Texas Oil and Gas union members supported green energy transition. That is really wonderful news and powerful news. I haven't made any progress with my website yet of the call out, but every day I still think it's necessary that white people can do a better job for calling out bad behavior by white people. Because Donald Trump following as president from Barack Obama is really an example of how a con artist was given a pass, a very evident con artist was given a pass by too many white people, meaning that death and devastation was invited in to impact America, not only eroding democracy tendencies, not only tendencies to remove accountability from government piece by piece, but also just the worst thing that Trump probably did at a global level, which was to discount COVID as a real thing. And that really unleashed the worst tendencies of human nature of so many people to then take up that idea and run with it, that COVID is a plot to oppress you. And people can look at their lives and cherry pick data points to say, yes, this is all about oppressing us, because look at how I'm hurting. My children can't go to the movies, or my business might be hurting. There's lots of data points to attach to that story if you hear it and it sounds appealing to you. That story that Trump told. He's a storyteller, he's a marketer, he understands how to sweep people in to the thrust of an archetype of I am the good guy, the rebel, the anti-hero, and the experts and the authorities are the true bad guys, and you are smart enough to see it and see through everything they're trying to tell you to the reality of Jewish people in Hollywood secretly oppressing children and Bill Gates microchipping you through a vaccine if you let him, and then you won't even own your own body, and the 5G networks will come and get you. And he knows that appeal for people who would rather watch the news, rather watch YouTube as if it's news, and turn off the news and turn off accounts from experts, and instead derive their news from a series of revelations on YouTube that's only for people smart enough to have found the answers that aren't available mainstream. He knows it's powerful to build enthusiasm for opposition to the mainstream. Bob says the green transition me thinking maybe the planet has a chance. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? I mean, everybody who has children would like for there to be a viable future for their children in which modern civilization hasn't collapsed as a consequence of being overwhelmed with exponentially increasing disasters. Okay, now here is Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has spoken to an audience in Alabama and encouraged them to respond to Joe Biden's vaccine campaign with guns. So essentially, yes, this journalist points out that she should not be treated as an oddity or a joke or a source of humor. She is a threat. She's trying to encourage domestic terrorism and an attack on the US government. And certainly if you were one, or if you were related to a public official who got shot by someone who was inspired by Marjorie Greene to use what they imagine their Second Amendment rights to be, which is to shoot people in government that they disagree with, if they feel emboldened to do that and you lose your life or you sustain a gun injury, you won't be laughing at Marjorie Taylor Greene and her vicious incitement of violence. All right. Lindsey Graham says he told Trump to urge supporters to get the COVID vaccine. Sure, but he didn't, did he? Trump did not urge his supporters to get the vaccine because that would have, he could have done it, but he evidently decided it wouldn't work optimally with his weaponization of contrarianism. It wouldn't work with his anti-hero shtick, anti-establishment shtick. Bob says, am I wrong to think that before we get booster shots here in the US, that the unvaccinated in other countries should get their first vaccine shots? Both could happen. So it's okay to advocate for both, because Pfizer and Moderna and other companies, AstraZeneca, they could work cooperatively with other countries. They could share the tech and they could share the expertise that's needed to sustain the recipe for the vaccines and manufacturing them. They could do more. So I don't think booster shots necessarily detract from efforts to globally vaccinate. I don't think it has to be an either or situation, but that's just from my limited understanding. I think it's important to push both, because if you need a booster shot, otherwise, or your vaccination has evaporated, then you're as good as being unvaccinated. So yes, it's a noble stance, and I totally support you having that thought, and it's good to have that thought and to entertain it, because it's good to pressure all the pharma companies to say, do not just concentrate on the more lucrative things, also attend to the socially responsible things of addressing the other country's needs and their need to have cheaper vaccine manufacturing companies established with the assistance of the developed world's innovators, medical innovators. It's not okay to just say, if you are home to a country that's innovated medically, then those are the only people who should benefit from it and the other people should suffer and die. It's also not logical sense in a pandemic, because the vaccine can mutate in other parts of the world and render the vaccines useless if you have vaccinated Western democracies and undervaccinated developing nations. I've forgotten what the latest term is. It's probably not developing nations. It's probably the global north and the global south. This is something about Donald sending one of the lawyers from the White House counsel's office when Trump was in office. So someone who he would have selected as having personal loyalty to Trump over democracy. He sent one of his lawyers to the GSA. What's the GSA? It's like the General Services. GSA, General Services Administration. That's the agency in charge of transition following the peaceful transfer of power. So Trump sent a lawyer on October the 29th, 2020, sent a lawyer from the White House counsel's office to the General Services Administration to serve as general counsel. General counsel is like the chief lawyer, isn't it? So that's evidence that as early as October the 29th, Trump anticipated that he wouldn't win the election, that he was publicly recognized as having homicidally mismanaged the COVID response and betrayed the American people. He understood that that was a potent argument in America prior to the election, and that there were people who understood his economic promises were also hollow. There were people who could look around them and see the job losses and the failure of the manufacturing sector to grow, that it was in recession. He understood that these things might mean that he would lose the election. So he sent a lawyer over, a Trump loyalist, to serve as general counsel to sabotage the transition. So that is a data point that supports that idea of a pre-planned coup effort. Donald Trump anticipating losing the election and trying to sabotage a peaceful transfer of power ahead of time. So I just want to make that point, because if Sheldon turns up, he definitely was highlighting that it was likely to be a coup. Trump was making all sorts of acting appointments to the Pentagon in the days after the election. Here is an article called "The Best." Oh, hang on. Okay, no, I'm not looking at the right thing. Present this one. Here we go. Okay. Kids under 12 can't be vaccinated yet. And until they can be, the best way to protect them is simple. Vaccinate all the eligible adults and teens around them. Oh, good. Well, maybe Holistic Deb can send some viewers over to me so that they can hear my denunciation of anti-vaxxers as being either just deluded or maliciously, willfully deluded. That's the two subgroups I'm prepared to divide anti-vaxxers into. 3, because there are those who profit from it as well. So just deluded people who are caught up in the culture and the online communities that are built around lying about public health, or people who are willfully and maliciously chasing clout by by spreading anti-vaccination messages because they enjoy the feeling of setting themselves up as a health authority, and particularly oppositionally setting themselves up as a health authority in opposition to mainstream doctors and scientists and researchers. And then, so just the clout chasing anti-vaxxers. And then thirdly, the worst group, the people that are chasing clout and chasing profits, the people that pursue clout at the expense of others, causing death, causing suffering amongst children, communities, and they're doing that knowing that they rake in the dollars from their vitamin supplements that they sell as an alternate pathway to health. And they are doing so much at an intuitive level to sell identity to deluded anti-vaxxers. So yes, Perry Pilot says, haha, I'm going to go in and invite them over. That's awesome. Thank you. I hope she tells them that I call anti-vaxxers racist in the context of COVID because of the disproportionate harm that communities of color have experienced, at least initially in the pandemic. And certainly I haven't seen any recent updates on the COVID tracker about the proportion of people who are suffering by race. I know that harm is being concentrated in Trump voting states, but that doesn't necessarily mean harm is concentrated amongst Trump supporters. There might still be essential service workers who are still disproportionately include Black Americans or Americans of color amongst their ranks, and who are getting harmed the most. So it's not at all a personal decision. I'm just going to mute the bad person. It's not at all a personal decision because we live in communities and our health is linked because of the nature of a pandemic and the nature of infection. So it's not at all a personal choice in the same way that drink driving is not a personal choice. It's a choice with consequences in the real world as well as legal consequences. So there's no legal consequences yet for doing the health equivalent of drink driving, which is to say vaccine refusal in the context of a global pandemic. Paul says, Dav, have you heard from Brian lately? Yes, he is off social media a lot, but he's using his free time to just decompress because it is quite hard, obviously, with COVID in Florida and the irresponsible, murderously reckless behavior of Republican Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. The bad person also says it's not malicious. I think it's the principles. Sure, if you've been deluded to form your identity around the idea that your principled decision, you're part of a push for principles and freedom, whereas really you've been pushed into an identity of undermining democracy in support of authoritarian figures who know how to weaponize ignorance and know how to weaponize gullibility. So that's your problem, Giga. The anti-vaccine people feel that, yes, that we're deluded and sheeple. The thing is, though, that they are scientifically provably wrong and provably murderous, as evidenced by the deathbed confessions of people who regret not getting the vaccine for those stupid identity type of reasons. I didn't get the vaccine because it's, my community would have rejected me. All the people around me were not getting vaccinated to defy the Biden administration, and out of principle because we were told to do something. So saying out of principle, I oppose public health, and out of principle, I oppose doctors' recommendations. Out of principle, I listen to YouTube videos that spew hate and nonsense rather than legitimate authorities and legitimate experts. That is all something that really should be deterred. There should be punitive consequences attached to that kind of self-gratifying behavior, murderously self-gratifying behavior, because if you jeopardize the lives of others in order to feel good about yourself and your quest for principles, you should just be told, you should be called out to your face, you should lose your job, you should not be allowed to be employed in any type of position where you can endanger others, and you should also be compelled to pay more money. There should be some type of consequences attached to willfully and purposefully endangering the health and safety of others. And there isn't scientific evidence on both sides. So I'm going to mute you at this point for just spreading disinformation. There isn't scientific evidence on both sides. What there is billions of people, 4.5 billion people who've taken vaccines to prevent COVID. And the scientific data is not both sides. It's one side that says the people getting hospitalized, the people dying are predominantly the unvaccinated. So because of the nature of statistics and breakthrough infections, or rather just, what do we call them? Infections that occur in spite of vaccination, which are also concentrated amongst people whose immune systems are compromised to some degree. So Bob says, my nephew and nieces are not vaccinated for any childhood disease. That is sad. Not even measles. But my older nieces that are over 18 have gotten their vaccine shots and have gotten their childhood vaccines. So it seems that their evangelical upbringing has stuck. Has stuck or unstuck? Because it's good that they've now gotten their childhood vaccines. There's a lot of evangelical Christianity that harnesses that oppositional human tendency as well to say, the mainstream world, we reject it, it's sinful, blah, blah, blah. We are in opposition to that. We define ourselves by our opposition to modernity and modern science. So we say we put our trust in Jesus. We say don't get the vaccine because that's hurting Jesus's feelings by showing you don't trust him. So that's one way in which evangelicals can recruit people through the emotional incentive of being emotionally and spiritually galvanized through opposition, through defining yourself in opposition to the mainstream. It's very galvanizing. It's very community building when you unify together through the bonds of shared contempt for other people. I love it that I can't see Giga unless I choose to click view comment now. And he or she says, it's important to have opposition. This girl is a monster cow. Oh, sweet. I'll go hide that comment back again. It is important to have democratic, good faith opposition. Good faith opposition is part of a healthy democracy, and bad faith opposition for opposition's sake is fundamentally dysfunctional because it means you've veered off the beaten track of ideas or policy debate. You're just out of principle opposing what the mainstream proposes, which means there's no unifying principle. There's no genuine intellectual grounds for opposing things. It's just the emotional excitement of always saying, nay to you. Nay to you, we are better. Because everything you say is wrong, making us the experts, because we disavow your expertise and we disavow modernity and multi-plural democracy, and we disavow gender inclusiveness, and we disavow all of these things. So much fun to disavow things, and we have to recognize the addictive nature of not just anger, but disavowal, rejection. It feels powerful to be able to reject others. Imagine being a very attractive person who is constantly getting asked out on dates, and you get to say no. If you enjoy that kind of thing, it would be very addictive. You could just keep saying, wow, look, every rejection I issue is a confirmation of how great I am. So for Trumpists and anti-vaxxers more broadly, every time they reject some scientific information they hear about, that's a confirmation to themselves for how intelligent and astute they are, to be able to see through the mainstream that everybody else is falling for. It's very motivating and very rewarding in a cyclical, dopamine generating way that that they always can get exposed to a little bit of somebody else making an assertion, and they can always say, haha, I know better. I'm so clever. I have my little online anti-vax communities that's assured me I'm the best parent in the world for just making that simple but powerful choice to never vaccinate my children. That guarantees my children physiological supremacy over the little vaccinated weaklings of the parents who didn't know any better because they didn't go onto Facebook and find an anti-vax group like I luckily did. So that cements my good fortune and my cleverness. I'm just so super duper clever that everybody telling me actually science doesn't support your position, that just fuels my energy for telling them that they are wrong and that I'm definitely right. Oh my God, it just hit me that my nieces and nephews, says Bob, haven't even had the polio vaccine. My goodness, that scares me. It shouldn't, Bob, because your nieces and nephews will predominantly be able to benefit from the fact that most people have had the polio vaccine. Your nieces and nephews, it is scary, so I don't want to delegitimize your fear, but I think polio is probably the least of your worries with your nieces and nephews. I would imagine that COVID is in far higher circulation in the community. Yes. Somebody from Twitch says hello. Oops, no, I wanted to put that on screen just to say hi to whoever you are. All right. All right, what else do we have? So that's a nice picture up on screen of children wearing masks, which they do very easily once it's an established thing. If a child doesn't have a parent trying to say to them, what an injustice, what a travesty this is that you've been asked to wear a mask, then they just really cheerfully get on with their lives and wear them. This is a Bloomberg quick take of Lindsey Graham, not Lindsay Lohan, describing that he asked Trump to promote vaccines. And I think this is at least one tick in the column of what Democrats have going in favor for them at the moment, because in the non-favor column, there's the gerrymandered districts as a product of Trump's deliberately botched census rollout, so that migrants were more fearful of responding to the census in an environment in which there was lots of threats of mass deportation and just people worrying that they might attract government discrimination, so that migrants were less likely to be counted, so that redistricting was likely to occur then in favor of white-dominated populations. Christopher is in Arizona and says, here in Arizona, I notice Trump supporters or anti-vaxxers rely on poor info and are more comfortable listening to anyone who would be considered racist or those who do not believe in democracy. Yes, we always have to speculate how much of this is the hood being taken off, but how much also is Ku Klux Klan attitudes, new neo-Confederacy attitudes being increased. How many new people are buying into this and how many people are just being exposed for what they were before, racist. But the racism is definitely on steroids at the moment because the racists have been empowered to put the lives of Black people in danger. I'm sure that Trump supporters heard the news that people who examined the racial breakdown of people impacted negatively by COVID, they saw that more Black people were losing their jobs and more Black people were losing their businesses. More Black people weren't qualifying for business help under the Trump administration's rollout of business loans, because the business loans were being administered through larger banks when Black businesses were more dependent on loans from smaller community banks, which were less likely to have systematically racist practices. Just how systematic entrenched racism works in American institutions unless efforts are actively made to roll those practices back. So Trump supporters heard about that. They know on some level that there was a disproportionate impact. Doesn't mean to say in numeric terms that there were more black people who died than white people, but at a proportion level, a higher percentage of the black community or the black demographic in America were died from COVID. At one point, it was something like 1 in every 1,000 Black Americans in the US had died from COVID. I can probably get that up on screen because there is data from the COVID tracking project. In any case, it may have shifted because the pandemic is concentrated in its impact now on the unvaccinated. But the thing is, there's still a disproportionately high number of Black Americans who are unvaccinated because of historically based reasons for distrusting the white-dominated medical establishment in America. So, yes. Oh, first we'll listen to Lindsey Graham while I look up.
I've urged him to speak up. He talks about it a lot, but I've urged him to be aggressive in saying, take the vaccine. The vaccine is the antidote to the virus wreaking havoc on our hospitals. You know, after having been sick for the last couple of days, you appreciate God and nurses more, right? I've urged him to speak up. He talks about it a lot, but I've urged him to be aggressive in saying, take the vaccine.
Now, I don't think he has talked about it. Donald Trump secretly was vaccinated, so a lot of his supporters are probably unaware that Trump was vaccinated. Death, well, confessions of someone suffering that we've talked about. So I'll maybe take myself out of the picture and hope that this is.
That's okay. I made a mistake. I admit it. And I'm taking my responsibilities now. Support the love of God. If you really want to have a chance, don't fall numb to all the TV, Roderick, and social media. Just protect yourself. I messed up big time.
Okay. That was important. These are contact details here for people in the on the board of governors for the post office, because Biden's hands are a little bit shackled, which is sad because Louis DeJoy was an instrumental part of Trump's coup efforts to sabotage American democracy and to purposefully mischaracterize COVID and purposely mischaracterize the safety of vote by mail so that his supporters would vote in person and be counted first, and the Biden supporters would fear COVID and be more likely to take advantage of mail-in voting. And then he would get Louis DeJoy to delay the mail and then say, well, those votes are too late. You can't count them. You can only count the votes on the day, which will have a red shift, a pro-Trump shift, just because of the nature of differential levels of fear of COVID. That Trump supporters were lied to and told that COVID wasn't real. People from all over the world heard that message, but it was a self-serving part of Trump's plan to steal the election. Yes. Bob is saying he saw a post that a Lowe's in Missouri said that if an employee is vaccinated but has a breakthrough COVID, they will pay sick leave. And if they aren't vaccinated and get COVID, they will be fired. And it turns out that every employee has since been vaccinated. That's a really interesting thing to talk about, Bob, because it shows that some businesses may lead the way and help give the Biden administration confidence to do things like make vaccines mandatory for people serving in the military. Vaccines always have been mandatory in the military, but specifically to make the COVID vaccine mandatory. But it shows that a lot of the vaccine hesitancy evaporates in the face of real-world negative consequences. If they know lose their job if they get COVID and they're not vaccinated, whereas the carrot of, yes, if I get COVID, a breakthrough case, and I'm vaccinated, I'll get sick leave. So that's really formalizing a carrot and stick approach, and that's what's necessary sometimes to break through people's delusional convictions that they've picked up from YouTube and disinformation agents on social media. So these are the USP Board of Governors. Message me if you want their email addresses, because I've got them here. Ron A. Bloom, he's a Democrat appointed to the head of the Board of Governors. He's a Democrat, but he supports Louis DeJoy, which is awful. These are part-time jobs for people. So basically, we need to circulate the idea that it's up to the public to push back and to be outraged about the fact that they support Louis DeJoy remaining in office as the Postmaster General of the United States. He is harming mail services for Americans. It's the mail sorting machines that he commanded be destroyed. That destroyed $6 million worth of value, I believe, for the United States Postal Service, as well as causing significant delays and things getting lost for people's packages. Okay, now I'm going to show something which is, that's states reporting. No, I want overall. Okay, the dashboard is not cool, but this is cool. I have got okay, I've got the COVID tracker up on screen. I'll share it with you. And we think about the sociology of this. The frame of reference is that that white Trump supporters will be more hesitant to get the vaccine because of a sociological push within those groups to demonstrate their loyalty to President Trump by not getting the vaccine because it's being distributed by the Biden administration. If it was being distributed by Trump, there would be a lot less hesitancy on the part of Republicans. Many of them would cheerfully get the vaccine, and all of their arguments about how it's choice and freedom would evaporate. They would cheerfully get the vaccine and say, hooray for President Trump for solving the problem of COVID. It wasn't a big problem, but whatever problem it was, he solved it. He's the Messiah. Okay, get myself out of the way here. Here we go. COVID-19. This is outdated info. It's from March, so a few months old. But at that stage, it was evident that COVID-19 was affecting Black, Indigenous, Latino, and other people of color the most. It's a collaboration between the COVID Tracking Project and the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research. So nationwide, Black people have died, this is from March, Black people at that stage had died at 1.4 times the rate of white people. Here you can see deaths per 100,000 people by race or ethnicity. But the thing is, the 100,000 people are just people. It's not per 100,000 specifically Black people. What am I trying to say here? I need to get my math head turned on. If you add up all these cases out of 100,000, but then you also look at the racial composition of America, it's just hugely disproportionate to have so many deaths of Black people per 100,000 relative to how many Black people there actually are in the United States. So Black people account for 15% of COVID deaths where race is known. But also, if you add up all of those percentages, it's something ridiculous. Like all the people of color who've died relative to white people. So Indigenous people. See, look at these counties. If you look at these counties that say counties with the highest death rates, in Georgia, the gray line here, this is Hancock, Georgia, has 400, 600, so what seems to be approximately 700 deaths per 100,000 people of Black Americans, but Black Americans should not constitute the highest level of death per capita because they're only 14% of the population. 2 of the top 5 counties with the highest death rates in the nation are all predominantly Black. Okay, no, wait. So it's just, I need a mathematician to work with me. So 2 of the top 5 counties with the highest death rates in the nation are predominantly Black. That just means, yes, it was disproportionately impacting Black Americans. But also these red lines, these orangey lines here are Hispanic or Latino, and they are featuring heavily as well. The virus is showing Black people what they knew all along. So COVID itself does not discriminate by race, but employment does, and disproportionately employing Black Americans in relatively lower paid jobs that have a lot of customer-facing exposure. Oh, I've talked for an hour. John's here and says, good morning, Dav. Thank you, John. I'm just going to quickly bring up this Atlantic article so that you can see, because it's an under-discussed phenomenon, and probably for good reasons. The more you tell Trump supporters that Black people are being disproportionately harmed, the more you probably increase their enthusiasm for undermining public safety measures. Because even if it's unconscious, they like hurting people of color because they're racist. And they organize their worldview along a constructed and artificial social hierarchy in which certain skin colors have more worth. At the stage when this article was written in December 2020, Black people were dying at 1.7 times the rate of white people from this virus, which means that the toll of these disparities has never been easier to quantify. 19,000 Black people would still be alive if not for systemic racism. Good, I'm glad somebody put it like that, to just calculate the actual number. As of December 2020, it seems likely that systemic inequality has meant an extra 19,000 Black Americans dead than should have been the case just purely at a population level. If COVID-19 just proportionately killed people, but it's disproportionately killing Black Americans who've had less access to high quality hospital care, who've had less access to health insurance, because a lot of white people with good jobs, whether they recognize it or not, that high quality healthcare is subsidized by the government because their employers can use all that health insurance as a tax deduction, meaning the government is helping pay for the good healthcare that white people get. White people who gatekeepers have ensured occupy most of the roles, not all, because yes, the Black middle class exists. Black Americans can get good jobs. It's more difficult. There are more obstacles in their way because of white gatekeepers at an HR level who throw out resumes of people with identifiably Black sounding names, and they're less likely to allow Black people in through the gates of that white favoritism. Okay, Bob says, an Indigenous elder of Cherokee descent said the difference between Western settler mindset of I have rights and the Indigenous mindset of I have obligations. So Bob says, instead of thinking that I'm born with rights, I choose to think I was born with obligations to serve past, present, and future generations and the planet herself. That's such a great thing for me to close with, Bob, because yes, it doesn't have to be an either or choice. You can still have rights, but putting more emphasis on our mutual obligations to each other is the way forward if humanity is to flourish forward and even if white people can have their children exist in a future where disasters, man-made exacerbated disasters have not become so widespread that civilization crumbles. John points out that quite a few Black people also fall victim to anti-vax disinformation. Yes, there is an overlap, or there are overlapping Venn diagram circles between white Americans who are Trump addicts out of an affinity for racist rhetoric, and Black Americans who are anti-establishment because of a history of persecution from the establishment. So there's an overlap of contrarian impulses there that means it's not just white Trump supporters who oppose the vaccine. There are also some Black people who are wary of and consequently opposed to a white delivered vaccine, or they don't get exposed to enough of the Black doctors and Black community leaders who have said, please disregard internet disinformation, please disregard internet appeals to subversive knowledge of the conspiracies that you're super clever. It is very appealing for people whose egos have been abraded by the system, who've been told all their life they're not good enough, they can't get into higher education, they can't get the well-paid jobs and make it to easy street. There's always a way to appeal to people who've been derided or who felt snubbed by American meritocracy. Bob says, you and everyone here have made my weekend so much better, and say hey to Mr. Dav. I absolutely will. Thank you so much, Bob. All the best. Take care, everybody. And don't forget to call people out for deadly pride if they insist on ignoring authorities and putting all their eggs in the basket of social media disinformation experts. People who gain money and clout and attention out of selling you a pack of deadly lies. Christopher Lucas, thank you. Take care. Thanks for the flower. Love you all, and so glad to be sharing a country with you now that we're all residents of the United States. Oh, not Perry Pilot. Perry Pilot's from the UK, but Perry Pilot, love you too. I'm being very liberal with my use of the word love today, but we have an affinity. This is a community of people who try and sort through disinformation and cement our ability to articulate a counter narrative to anti-democratic, contrarian, irresponsible, deadly bullshit. Ta-da! I think I should write that sentence down. All the best, take care, and hope to talk